Have you ever noticed that when theists talk about the atheist worldview, they often get it totally wrong? I know because as a former theist myself, I used to get the atheistic worldview wrong in exactly the same way. Sneak preview, I'm talking about values or meaning making. So let's talk about it. I just want to recognize up front, the issue I'm talking about is actually a very human one. We all see through our own worldview, and it includes when we're examining the little bit we might know about someone else's worldview. When it comes to someone who's an atheist, it's not even a worldview itself, it's just a view on a particular issue, giving us very little to go on. This can get even more confusing when there's parts of our own worldview that we take for granted. There's parts of our worldview that we would tend to think through, but can't really step outside of and think about because we haven't ever known any other way to be. Like a fish in a fishbowl that doesn't know it's wet because it's never been dry before. This makes some misunderstanding very understandable. We're not able to conceive of something beyond all that we've ever known before. Now, when theists, or anyone else for that matter, thinks about atheists, the one thing they have to go on and at front of mind is on the question of God belief. Do you believe or not that there's a God? Theists say yes, atheists will say no. Based on awareness of this limited issue alone, theists will often make comments like the following. A strictly reductive materialism, atheism, or philosophical naturalism is nothing more than a culture of death and meaninglessness, if you think about it rationally. 2 exclamation points. Atheism basically says birth is an accident, life is meaningless and absurd, and death simply ends the absurdity and illusion that birth began. This is actual YouTube comment. What is happening here exactly? Someone being an atheist doesn't really tell you too much about how values and meaning work in their worldview, does it? It just answers the question of whether or not they believe in a God, right? So where's this stuff about meaninglessness, quote unquote, coming from? Well, sort of. To try to understand, let's try to put ourselves in the shoes of the theist, as they're imagining atheism. So imagine you're a theist and all you know about an atheist is that they lack belief in God. You don't have any access to how meaning and value works in their worldview just from knowing that they're an atheist. But on the other hand, you do have access and are tending to think in terms of your own worldview. And for many theists, they have an entirely God-centric view of how values work, values and meaning. What's the purpose of life? Whatever the purpose was when God created it. What's the meaning of life? Whatever meaning God had in mind when he set it all up. What should we value in life? Whatever God values or wants us to value. What about moral values? What's good, bad, right, or wrong? Whatever God is the source and ultimate standard of morality and ultimate arbiter of justice in the universe says it is. Now imagine what happens when you take away the God at the center of the Christian or theist value system. You lose the values and meaning that are offered by that system. Now imagine if that's your only understanding of how meaning and values can work within a worldview. Atheism then would represent to you the loss of all meaning and value, period. And this is exactly what comments like the one I read a moment ago express. But the situation is actually even worse than this because it's not just self-professing theists that have this problem. When I first deconverted from theism in the year 2000, I didn't have any non-theistic understanding of how values could work. And so I became both a self-professing atheist and a nihilist for a short period of time. During that period of time, my experience intellectually was much like I had feared when I was a theist, the loss of existential and ethical value or meaning. But what I didn't realize was that like a fish in a fishbowl, I had actually still retained part of my theistic worldview, a God-centric understanding of human values. The atheistic worldview I both feared and was now living was not a fully secular one. It unconsciously combined a theistic God-centric view of values with an atheist view on the existence of the God at the center of all that, an incompatible combination of worldview component. What I would later realize is that the nihilistic nightmare I was now living was not the unavoidable result of a holistically secular worldview. Instead, it was the result of a broken or gutted theistic worldview. Long ago, Friedrich Nietzsche was also tuned into this fact when he wrote the following. When one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. Christianity is a system, a whole view of things thought out together. By breaking one main concept out of it, the faith in God, one breaks the whole. Friedrich Nietzsche, Twilight of the Idols. When theists imagine an atheistic worldview in this way, they're not actually imagining a necessary result of an atheistic or holistically secular worldview. Instead, they're imagining a gutted theistic worldview with atheism haphazardly injected at the center. But this is nothing like the meaning-rich experience that a lot of us actual atheists with fully secular worldviews, value system included, are living day by day. And before we talk about one way that secular values could work as distinct to theism, Let's talk about one more way that this broken, gutted, or zombie Frankenstein theism, I always like to call it, can rear its head in the fearful imaginings of theists. Let's talk about the myth of replacing God with science. We've already explored how theists and even atheists turned theists can conceptualize an atheistic worldview where they still unconsciously have like this God-centric view of values, but just lack the belief in the God at the center of it. Another variation of this seems to come from the fact that in the modern age, science is often a source of tension with people and some more traditional religious beliefs, especially things like biblical literalism and things like the theory of evolution. For this reason, it's natural for theists to sometimes imagine science replacing God in an atheist worldview. But this isn't really the case, at least in terms of how it actually works, or at least would necessarily work. Effectively, this is another form of broken theism where a lot of the overall structuring of values and things is maintained, but science is just assumed to replace God in the center. It's just such a theist concern about science replacing God that seems to be reflected in lyrics like the Christian lyrics of the band Thrice. We're more than carbon and chemicals. We are the image of the invisible, in the song Image of the Invisible. If science or strictly reductive naturalism replaces God, what does that say about who we are and what our value is? The theist seems to wonder. But even the idea of looking to science in this way reveals a complete misunderstanding of what science is made for. The scientific method helps us better map and model objective reality. Its job is not to help us, to tell us what our value is or give us like the ideal language for expressing what we mean to ourselves and one another. In fact, science is optimized to try to avoid human bias and emotion from distorting results. And cold technical language like carbon and chemicals are well suited for this task. To then turn around and expect science to appeal to our human need for subjective meaning at every turn just makes no sense. It's a false start and it's a fool's errand, really. Unlike theism, where God is a source for both truth and meaning, science is mainly just a tool for helping us better understand truth in a way that will often not appeal to emotion, which is a key part of what causes us to value and find things meaningful in the first place. Sure, many insights from science can appeal to the human desire for meaning. See Carl Sagan. Or even just the pursuit of truth through science can be a very meaningful human experience. But to expect science to appeal to us in this way at every level just doesn't make any sense and violates how it's meant to work. It violates its purpose and nature, basically. Here again, the theist is imagining not a well-thought-out secular worldview where science is what it is, a specific tool with a specific purpose, but instead imagining a worldview where the theistic structure of values remains largely intact, with God as the source of values and truth, and science has just been haphazardly shoved into God's place. But as we'll see, science as the foundational source for human values makes no sense in an even more fundamental way than this. Science is a methodology. It's not a conscious being, but it takes a conscious being to find something valuable or find an experience valuable or meaningful in the first place. For an atheist and secular humanist like myself, the origin of that meaning is not God or science, but humanity itself. You and me. Like in theism, in a secular worldview like mine, value comes from conscious beings, from a conscious being or beings. At least in one way, another way of saying this is to say that human values are subjective, or that values in general are subjective. We can see this reality reflected in our everyday language. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Let's say your friend finds someone attractive that you don't. The beauty is the value, valuing something for being aesthetically pleasing or delightful to you. And the beholder is the subject, person doing the valuing. Or take another phrase like, I can tell that is very, that means a lot to you. The person who finds something very meaningful, or the meaning itself is the valuing of the thing for being an experience or something that is very fulfilling or important to them for some reason. And the you is the subject, the person doing the valuing. You get to see this also in the idea of purpose. You could ask just questions like, what's your intention, or what's your goal, or what's your point? The intention or the goal, or the point, the purpose is a certain outcome that a person values, and the person valuing the outcome is the subject. So all examples of where values are subjective in our everyday language. So unsurprisingly then, in my secular worldview, values are subjective. And this is true whether or not it's the idea of a God or a human being doing the valuing. In either case, they're a subject and it's them valuing particular things. But with God, some people find comfort in the idea of this external ultimate source and authority for their values to unite around. And there's kind of this idea that it's going to help there be more unity and avoid chaos, at least in theory. And the main thing I want to say about this is that it's true, like human beings, because we're social animals, we don't just value things alone or individualistically. We also like to come together and join and unite around our shared values. Religion, politics, laws, charities, social and interest groups. For me as a secular humanist, the only higher purposes, which these are all examples of, are those that we together lift above ourselves. And for an atheist like me, the idea of God is just one example of how we do this. More specifically, in my worldview, I see God as a projection, an imagined projection of our made in our own idealized image, individually and collectively. Everything good about us is also true about this God, and everything we perceive as bad or weak, this God perfectly makes up for, including our powerlessness in the face of being able to control our fate, something which we value having a way to cope for by believing in this God. The God we lived up above ourselves is a perfect embodiment of our values, or in the lesser case, maybe a perfect embodiment of the values of ancient people, including their ancient prejudices, which we may be stuck to never be able to discard or grow out of for some people. That's why in my worldview, I call it like I see it. The source of this ideal person with ideal values is us. It's humanity. It's you and me. As one ancient philosopher said, to paraphrase, humanity is the measure of all things. We're the source. Another common human value, also in my worldview as a secular humanist, is the value truth. I value truth because it helps, because I first value well-being, both mine and that of others, and truth helps us to live better lives. It's only because I first value human well-being and flourishing that I in turn value truth and things like science, which help us with truth. My values don't begin with science. So we've come full circle. Hopefully we've set the table to show why, in a holistically secular worldview, science doesn't need to awkwardly replace God, and our values don't need to come from an ultimate or external anything. The abstract ideas and tools of humanity are not the source of our values, meaning, purpose, and moral. We are. Also, unlike God and theism, we were not made for a human idea like science. Science was made by and for us. We don't look to science to tell us what we mean to it. We tell science and the ideas it yields, insights it yields, what they mean to us. But yes, we can still value things and share the values that we have in common because of our common human nature. And we can still organize and gather around the different purposes and goals that we commonly value by way of our culture. All the meaning and value that humans have ever experienced has always been subjective values. That's my understanding. And we can continue to do that and find value in doing that. By the way, you remember that Christian song lyric from earlier? We're more than carbon and chemicals. We are the image of the invisible. I kind of feel like it's doing a little bit of a trick here. Like, what if we try to turn the tables and let's say we took something boring from the Bible and then we put it up against something more, like a more romantic insight from the reflections of science from Carl Sagan. How would that lyric work out, and how fair would it be to do this? Could say something like, we're more than just another name in a long, boring genealogy that no one knows anything about in the dusty, boring scriptures. We're the stars reborn and a way for the universe to experience itself. I'm just saying, two could play at this game. So what do you think? Do you agree that the nihilism that theists so often fear is actually just a failure to imagine a holistically thought-out secular worldview? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to join me on this ongoing meaning-making journey, even with a humanist and a naturalist who wants to let science be science and let humans bring the meaning, then please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.